Welcome to the June session of the Service Design Network Dallas chapter. Welcome to those who have joined us in the past. We've been doing this for several years now, so hopefully you have joined us before. If it's your first time today, welcome. We'll throw some really quick introduction. First of all, thank you to our two sponsors who've been with us for several years now, Slalom and Precocity, who are helping us keep this meetup/hybrid version of the program alive for several years. And so thank you to our sponsors for that. Quick introduction, I'm Greg Luffy from Slalom, and we have Brandon, Christopher, and Brenda also. So we are the four members of Service Design Dallas, and we are happy to have you with us today. If you have not seen previous version of the show, so to speak, you can always go on YouTube channel where you can see all the past. I think we have like 30 or 40 now over the past 4 years. You can catch up on the past speakers who shared with us their service design knowledge and expertise. So if you have not, catch up and see what's on those sessions. Super quick comment, as Brenda was mentioning, if you have a question for Lou today, please go ahead and put in the chat that you would like to have a question for him. You can talk amongst yourself and you can engage. Usually it's very engaged chatting room. But if you have a specific question for Lou, definitely write it down. I have a question for Lou about this, and we can aggregate that for him. We can do a Q&A at the end of the session. So we're going to set up this, we call the Summer of Design 2023. We're going to have 4 speakers this summer, trying to keep it a bit more like casual. We'll have some pretty heavy things over the past sessions, or like Gen AI, for example. It's more like a heavy tutorial. This time is going to be much more like loose, I would say, in terms of topic. We're going to have obviously Lou's going to be today. We're going to also have Mike Montero in July, which should be a lot more colorful, most likely. We're also going to have the wonderful Steve Anderson that talk to us about some really cool gamification where you can use cards to get some workshopping. And of course, the wonderful Megan, of course, going to be talking to us about some really practical service design stuff. So this year we're going to have some service design masters, and we're very fortunate to have them joining us this summer. So very cool, nice, easygoing conversation around design ethics, gamification, practical service design. So usually the summer is a time where we all take a break and go to the beach and go to the ocean, whatever it is, and you just kind of pick a couple of good books and read on the beach. And a lot of you are, what kind of design books should we be looking at, for example? So we obviously have some favorites. I personally I can only show you those I have here, but I am just speaking the word. Definitely, if you haven't read those, you should read them this summer. So Service Design, Orchestrating Experiences, Design for Care, also a great one, Closing the Loop, and Design Beyond Businesses. As a coincidence, those 5 books are all published by Rosenfeld Media. And to discuss that further, today we're going to be with Lou Rosenfeld, who is the publisher and founder of Rosenfeld Media. Lou, if you have a couple of minutes to introduce yourself, tell us who you are, tell us what you do, tell us what you've done, tell us what you're working on, and then we'll just ask you some design-savvy questions.
Sure. Well, thanks, Greg and Robin and Brandon and everyone here. Really appreciate the invitation. And for those of you in Texas who are actually in Texas, I'm sorry. I hope the heat breaks before long. I'm Lou Rosenfeld, and I'm the Rosenfeld of Rosenfeld Media. I'm actually one of 2 Rosenfelds here. I have a partner who happens to be one of my brothers. A lot of people know me or may have known me as the co-author of what's called the Polar Bear book by OReilly, Information Architecture for the Web and Beyond. First edition came out in, I think, 1998, which really frightens me to say. And then the 4th edition came out, I think, about 8 years ago. I really don't remember. But I've been very involved. I actually started off as a librarian. I became very involved in information architecture, which when I started was, to my mind, an opportunity to take the principles and practices of librarianship and bring them into the digital world, which was just starting to explode in the early mid-90s when I really got going in that area. And I had a company for many years that was an information architecture consultancy up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Then I was an independent consultant doing IA work for years. Actually, I see it as really being information therapy. I didn't get to do a lot of IA. I got to do a lot of helping people feel less bad about how bad IA was in their organizations. That's a whole nother conversation, though. As a hobby in the mid-2000s, I started Rosenfeld Media because I really wanted to start another business that was focused on books on UX. And I didn't really see the big established publishers really being willing to invest in the growth of UX. And so started publishing books, and we're now up to about 53 or 4, I believe. And thanks for mentioning those ones you just had up a moment ago, Greg. We also, like a lot of publishing companies, moved into putting on conferences, and we do 4 conferences a year. The Design Ops Summit, Design in Product, Advancing Research, and Enterprise UX. So those are our 4 events, happen once out every quarter. And I love helping people make things out of information, whether it's books, conference programs, presentations, and what have you. So that's me. I hope that's not too much, Greg.
No, it's perfect. Thank you so much. So if that's okay with you, we just you a few questions about what you're currently working on, what you're actually seeing in terms of trends. I'm assuming you have a lot of like potential writers that come to you and ask you to publish their work. So you may actually have an inside view into what's happening in terms of like design trends, all those things. So we're going to kind of like pick your brains a little bit. And potentially somebody on this chat may actually want to be contacting you to write their own book, right? So we kind of go through the process of what it takes to actually write a book, author a book, publish a book, which is not easy. But maybe you have some tips for some of us who actually are interested to share knowledge. So let's go to the first question. If I can just click it. There you go. So what recent new tool methodology do you think has had the biggest impact on how design teams work and what they create? So here I have some examples like AI, obviously, research repositories, design systems, mixed methods and research. Tell us what you think about this.
Well, those are my examples, Greg, to be fair. You already answered the question to some degree, but AI, it's just sort of like, that's the obvious answer. So we just did Enterprise UX, the conference, about 2 weeks ago. And it was interesting because we really wanted to step back from, a lot of the sort of topics that normally get covered at a lot of industry conferences and focus on areas that really are important in large organizational settings, enterprise settings, and don't always get enough attention. And so we did some research, and what we learned was there were 4 topics that people really cared about in large organizations. One was, I'm not saying this because I'm biased, one was information architecture. 2 was designing with data. 3 was systems thinking. And 4 was AI and machine learning. But, so we had basically a 2-day conference with a half a day on each of those topics. And it was really great, but really all 4 topics were very much infused with AI. And for example, IA is kind of something that's being increasingly used in the service of AI. In other words, if you don't describe information and ideas very well, AI ain't got much to go on. Systems thinking has a role in helping people with AI, certainly designing with data. AI is all about data and ways to actually make meaning out of it. So it was really kind of like a big AI conference. In fact, we're thinking if we do it again next year, it might just be about AI in the UX space and how people who work in enterprises can take advantage of it. I had some other ideas up there. I'm personally excited because by things like design systems and research repositories in particular, because they're going to power a lot of interesting AI work. And I'm also really interested to see how our field, whether it's researchers or designers, what have you, start identifying and really working on difficult problems that AI is not so good at. So, if AI can get us 80% of the way there, let's say you're a researcher and AI can do some rough summarization of research data, still not going to do the synthesis and the heavy duty insight work, but it should set you up to do it. And that's exciting. I mean, if any of you do research, it's boring as hell to code research results. It's really hard to do that across different research formats. So you have your video interviews, you have your survey results, you have your work from a field study, et cetera, et cetera. How do you put all that together? AI tools, LLMs are good at integrating across all those various formats, but not necessarily good at arriving at meaning. And that's where humans are really good. So I'm looking forward to humans like us getting to do that really fun, hardcore, high thinking work that AI is going to free us up to do, assuming we don't destroy the planet in the process. But that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, we hear a lot. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of AI conversation right now. There's a lot of people are starting to get into it. There is a tremendous amount of startups who are AI startups. We have a lot of money and capital, but they lack the data to actually just use that into their language model, right? So do you have any insight on how you're going to be able to kind of mitigate the data-driven decisioning and the AI, which one is supporting which one? How's it going to work as an ecosystem to have data and choosing AI or AI using data?
I don't know if I have a good answer, but I can try to fake one. So I was out in San Francisco still really great people there. One of them is Trisha Wong, who some of you may know. She's came up as an anthropologist and really, really tinker. If you've ever heard of the term thick data as opposed to big data, that's her term. She coined that. And her thinking is that it's an industry need to be the senior partner with AI. You're not going to fight it. It's not going to go away. It is something that we have to accept. It's a technology it's like, you may not like crypto, but it's not going to go away overnight because you don't like it. Good luck outlawing things like that. So it's here. But what is our role and what does being human mean in a world with AI? It means partnership, but partnership of a certain variety. And that partnership is one of us humans, hopefully understanding and making sure that we are the senior partner. I think that's a pretty good way to look at things. And I think that's also the way that, if I'm answering your question, Greg, and I may not have totally understood it, but I think that's a good model for us as service designers, other types of designers, researchers, what have you. So but maybe your question was a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of how we work with AI. Why don't you maybe take another crack at it, and I'll see if I can do a better job of answering.
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of you want to be using AI, but we kind of forget it. There's going to start having some articles surfacing about what is behind AI, right? So been sold this AI, this fantastic automated system, but turns out there's a lot of people who actually are doing a lot of labeling in some precarious condition, right? You can already start to read some articles about some things happening in Africa, for example. We have huge amount of people who are literally just tagging stuff and labeling stuff for very little money, right?
And they're unionizing, right?
Sure, I didn't go into that, but yeah. So there's definitely going to be a lot more surfacing. We've been given this great tool, but that tool also has some dark sides, and data still very much what feeds the system, right? So without data, there is no large language models, there is no AI at all. So you mentioned, data is definitely going to be something to be looked at very carefully. And do you have any current authors or people actually are writing books around that topic with that entanglement of data and AI?
I don't right now, but I will say that you're absolutely right. The quality, it's garbage in, garbage out. And, if there's no data or there's insufficient data, that's one problem. But the problem that I think we don't pay enough attention to is that the data is often not just interpreted with bias, but it's created with bias. So, just like like in the research world, we've been trying very hard to not only diversify the people that we talk to and interview and evaluate with when we're trying to see how products and services perform, but we're trying to diversify the teams of people who are doing the research and interpreting the results and synthesizing them. It's just like the fable of the blind man and the elephant. You don't really get to true insight unless you have multiple perspectives, operating together, looking at a problem together, and then synthesizing what they have found to get to that higher insight. I think the same is true in AI. It's less moderated by, there's less human, obviously less human intervention. But if we are pointing our data gathering in ways that are not looking to unearth different perspectives, that's worrisome. That just reinforces the biases that we already begin with. We're always better off when we don't let network bias just mess up the research we do. And it's the same thing in AI. It's a form of research in many cases. But what are we doing to get our data collection to happen in ways that represent more perspectives? So I see very similar to what researchers are dealing with.
So we just mentioned very quickly, and we're going to dive into this a bit more because this is what you do for a living, but tell us what is the process to get a great design books published? And also, as you mentioned, what is a great design conferences presentation? This is what you do for a living. What are the tips you can give us designers to kind of if you have a good idea, just reach out to me and I'll explain you how to get a book published. So we'll go through.
Yeah, let me talk at a sort of broad level, and I'm gonna reveal some stuff that just bothers the crap out of me.
Okay.
So, all right, look, I love OReilly as a publishing house. I wouldn't be where I am if they didn't take a chance on me. I really helped me make my name in the industry by co-authoring the information architecture book. That said, we got precious little support from OReilly in the writing of the book. It was not a collaborative process, and we certainly have got nothing in terms of the marketing. So when I started doing what I do with books, I was like, that's not a UX way to do it. It's not very designerly. Why don't we create a way to create books that is more collaborative and more iterative and more supportive? And I will tell you, the same thing was true with conferences. So I was a fairly well-known person and an experienced presenter, but I remember having an experience at a very high-level, famous conference that I won't name, where they didn't really tell me much about the audience, and it's my fault too. And I said, what if I give such and such talk? And they said, sure, it'll be great. You're great. So I show up, I'm on stage, it's 650 people in the room, and I give a really good talk on a topic they didn't care about. You know what that feeling is when you finish and there's 650 people in the room and there's not a single clap? That's a whole experience. And I was feeling very much like, well, if I'm ever doing conferences, I don't want a speaker to ever be in that position. I want to set them up for success. So what we've done, and why I think our books and conferences are a bit different, is we've created processes for helping authors and curators of conference programs and speakers create in a collaborative and iterative and inclusive way. And that's basically good design. So we do research, and we help our authors and our curators do research, and we create books and presentations where it's done over time. Our speakers work for 2-3 months in cohorts with the help of facilitators and speaking coaches and each other to develop their talks in ways that are not just good talks, but talks that fit together. We have conference programs that have a narrative arc and connective tissue in place. And it's the same with books. And so let me just put on Do Not Disturb here. It's That's my belief. That's, that is the way we should be creating products like books and conferences. And it's just eating our own dog food. And we don't, we're all designers and we're all thinking very seriously about how we can do really good design of one type or another, but we don't take those same principles and apply them in many cases to traditional products like books, like conferences. So that's our approach. If you are someone who likes the sound of that, you would like the fact that working with a company like us means more work on your book. It's just more work. Speaking at our conferences is more work. People don't even realize what they're getting themselves into, no matter how much we make the point up front, and they get sometimes kind of pissed off because they didn't realize how much time they're going to have to invest. But that's what it takes to advance the field. It takes work. And presenting or writing is a certain unique gift you get if you're lucky. It's not everyone gets that. We're very fortunate to get these opportunities to dig deeply into a topic we care a lot about with sufficient support and time. If you're someone who wants to write a book and you're already writing it and you're happy to do it by yourself and you're happy to go off into a garret and sit there for a year and write, that's how a lot of publishers do it. They're not going to give you support. Same as with conferences. You may just show up and just give a talk and leave. I just don't think that's the way I like it. That's my personal feeling. But let me put it to you this way. A publisher, if you're thinking about writing a book, the most important thing is that they have an audience you want to reach. The second most important thing is they have a process that gives you the kind of support you need the most. And if you don't need support, that's great. If you do, you should probably look for a publisher like us that gives more support. That's a very long answer to not quite the same question that I think you had again, Greg.
No, it's very valid, but do you have any tips? I mean, obviously, some of the books you have published, and I didn't want to be like too pitchy or salesy about it, but like some of the books you have are usually textbook material, right? So I know there's a lot of schools that actually have your books as textbook materials. So it is very important. Obviously, I've read your books, I've read a lot of your books, and I recommend them all the time to students, design students who are in school who may or may not have heard of your books, and I recommend them all the time to my team as well. But do you have any tips on, again, advancing the design knowledge, the design expertise, and sharing that information that we have collected and kind of like give that back, so to speak, like pay it forward? Do you have any tips on how to do so and how to approach you? And do you have a solid idea? Do you work with the authors kind of like, hey, this is not really trending right now? How about it?
Let me try to take a crack at that. So I think that's a great question because it gets me off my pedestal and gets me into more practical advice, which is a good thing. So we actually have a bunch of exercises that are listed on our, like, if you want to write a book page of our website. Everyone wants to write a book, first of all, and you should know that everyone may have a book in them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that book should come out. It's really hard. It's a gift, like I said, to have that time and ability to, or opportunity to think deeply. But it's bloody, painful, and lonely. If you have little kids, if you're working hard at a job and you're debt, if you have other constraints in your life, it may not be the right time. It's because it is a really painful experience, and it can be a lonely experience, even with support. And it's not something your family, your partner, is going to be able to help you with. And they may not even understand why you're doing it and why you're feeling the way you're feeling about it. So I just want to be upfront about that. But if you are thinking about it, like, one of the things that we find really useful is to see if you can create a one-page pre-proposal. It's basically, here's the use case for the book. I am trying to help such and such kind of people solve such and such problem. And it's also, who are you? What qualifies you? Can you do that in one page? And that sounds like it's a really short, easy thing, but it's not. It's a really painful thing because there's like with any sort of long format like a book, you need to constrain it at different points. And there's a forcing function in forcing you to talk about your book idea in one page. It forces you to distill clearly and concisely. And that's a really hard thing, but it's a really good thing if you're going to write. Then there are other forcing functions that you might consider. A book and a workshop often have a lot in common. So your introductory or opening chapter, which frames the challenge, is often sort of like the first hour of a day-long workshop that you might teach. So in many cases, we encourage people who are thinking of writing a book, well, workshop it first. See if you can teach a full day on this topic. Look at the forcing function of trying to squeeze it into a day. That'll help you figure out what's important and what to leave out. Another thing that we find useful, again, involving a forcing function is it's called the split the dollar exercise. And we didn't come up with that, but it's a variation on split the dollar. That's a budgeting exercise. And the way it works for books is, let's say you want to write a 200-page book, give or take. Which is a very different animal than a 500-page book. We usually encourage people to go for the sweet spot of around 150 to 225 pages. Let's say you pick that number, 200 pages, maybe it's 300 words a page. Try to squeeze your outline into 200 pages. Try to budget your outline so that you're helping your outline, first of all, become a table of contents. And that table of contents, each chapter has a page count. So I got 200 pages to play with. I've got 11 chapters. Let me start allocating my page count. And what you'll see is, one chapter is 50 pages. Should it be 20 pages? Should it be 2 chapters? Should I leave some of it out? That chapter is 1 page. Is it a chapter at all? Maybe it needs to get cut out or added to an existing chapter, and on and on. It forces you to prioritize what's important. That's a really good exercise. And I'll give you one more exercise. And this is really valuable, is you get that outline or that table of contents, and you need to write it so that if someone just looked at the TOC, they would be able, you can test this, they would be able to understand the journey that you are going to take them on as an author. Do those chapter titles hang together? Do they go together, or are they disjointed and the language is out of whack and disjointed, or not? If they do, you're on to something. Because a book is a journey, and you ultimately have to make a case to a reader that you are someone that they're going to want to be with for 200 pages. So what we often have people do who are working on book ideas is speak out loud or think out loud, basically articulate out loud, and we record it for them in Zoom usually, the journey, which is basically the answer to the question, walk me through your outline, and do it quickly. That will force you, again, think it through in a good way. So those are a few exercises that you might find useful. I can grab the link to that page that links to those exercises from our website.
So we talked about like topic. Obviously, a book has a topic. We talked about, you have about like 5 or 6 large service design centric, I would say, but you have like 50 something books now total. So based on your experience, what is the most important design creative tool methodology to come out of design still in the past 5-10 years, which you most likely have addressed in some of your books? I would talk about service design, system thinking. So what have you seen over the past 5-10 years?
There's this interesting thing where, I suggested these were some good topics: service design, IA, systems thinking. They're areas that are clearly go far beyond the surface level of an interaction, right? I mean, they're not graphic design, they're not interaction or interface design. And that's not surprising given that my beard is gray and people like in my generation, we have panned back as we became more experienced and more sophisticated in what we do, just to appreciate the areas of design that are beneath the surface, that are at a more systems level, that are at more of an ecosystems level. And I wish you all had your cameras on, but I'm sure that the average age, if we were all going to look at the people here on this call, is certainly older than, let's say, people on a call that had something to do with, quote, UI, UX, right? So as we mature, we start to go beyond the surface. And I think that's actually where the real changes can be made moving forward, because increasingly the stuff at the surface layers is going to be automated. And maybe that's where AI is going to really start eating into design work. And I think there's already some indications that's going to be the case. And certainly design systems can have that impact too. And I guess when you put AI together with design systems, yeah, I mean, a lot of the sort of surface level design work is going to be automatable. That said, I'm really interested in better articulation of what some people call soft skills. Better to call them people skills. But if you think of people who are interested, let's say in areas like systems design, probably been in the field for a few years, probably learned a lot along the way that you did not learn in an academic setting or wherever you got your training. So your craft has changed from what you learned in whatever educational setting you were in. And I think the delta is that you learn that there's all these people skills, like how to be a better listener, how to work with people who are different than you, how to negotiate, how to persuade, how to lead, all kinds of communications related challenges. These are people skills that I feel like we should be leaning into more. Meeting goes, but really a lot of us, we talk about them, but we haven't really necessarily boiled them down into something that's systematic and that's easier to teach people, or at least make it easier for them to learn. So I'd love for there to be books and other ways of learning that help maybe more junior members of our field get knowledge about people skills from something other than the school of hard knocks. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there, again, whether it's books, conferences, and other means of learning.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, there's definitely some soft skill and people skill that should be like looked at. We know we look in the current curriculum of the design schools. None of that are being taught in school right now.
It's getting better. And as Lyndon mentioned, I posted something on Friday night about this in LinkedIn and got a lot of feedback, and some coming from academics. But yeah, I mean, how many people start a design program wanting to take a class in listening skills, right?
Yeah.
How many people are hiring for that when they're hiring junior people? So there's a bit of a disconnect there economically.
Not to mention this economically, let's kind of flex a little bit on the power of design, right? So we've been clamoring for many years, hey, designers have a voice at the table, but we actually have quite a bit of power. There's a lot of designers out there who do really good work. I know what your answer is going to be, but I'm going to ask you, what is the biggest challenge design needs to be tackling right now, or design capability included?
Well, I think it's the climate crisis. I don't really see anything more important than that on the planet, or to the planet, better put. So, I'm actually, I like probably a lot of you, I think about it and I try not to because it just gives me such dread. And then I say, no, I got to think about it some more, because I can't just walk away from it. And then I try to get people together. And I've been doing a little bit of that, but I'm not doing enough because I have 80 hours of work in my normal 40-hour week as it is. And then I feel bad again because it's well, Why are those 80 hours more important than this? So I think a lot of us are struggling with that. That said, I also think a lot of us, myself certainly, overthink these things. Like, what are a few concrete things that we can do? What are a few things we can do as designers, as researchers that will help? Are there can we come up, for example, with like a list of 3 or 4 questions that we should all be asking when we're interviewing for a job in our industry? That's a small thing that could actually help a lot of people. Are there questions that we should be asking, or someone should be asking, when a product is being conceived or when a feature is being conceived? A couple questions might just be good to get on the table, just to have, print them on a card and put it in your wallet and remember to ask them. I feel like there's probably a whole host of small things that we can do that if many of us are doing it and at the right time, at the right pressure points, we can actually make an impact on top of the major thing that some of us will be able to do. I just hate to think that it's either you're dedicating yourself 100% and it's the only thing you're thinking about, or bust. There's got to be some sort of gradual middle ground in there that we can all be a part of and all participate in one way or another. And that allows us to move up and down in terms of how much energy we can and will invest into dealing with the climate crisis.
So you do agree that designers, regardless of what company they work on, have a bit of that, right? So for example, me and my team, we have been introducing the concept of having Earth as a stakeholder, right? Very simple step to do. You basically have your stakeholders, you basically add Earth, and you basically have people think about like, how is this product going to be influencing Earth, right? And that's a very small thing to do, is that it costs extra. It kind of makes your group think about it. And next thing you know, people kind of like thinking about sustainability. That is the power we have, and we can actually do this. And it's usually pretty welcome by the stakeholders, the business owners who haven't thought about it because it's just not a line item for their budget or agenda. But that's something we can do as designers, kind of like force the issue a bit or make them think about it.
Yeah, and maybe we have to frame it in some of the language that we're learning from them, like de-risk, right? It's can we de-riskify the work we're doing or the products we're launching? And there's certainly more and more indicators that, businesses are struggling with their decisions. You cannot get home insurance now in California, if I understand it, because of the lot of issues that have come straight from the climate crisis. That's amazing. A lot of companies won't do business selling a mainstream product like insurance in the state of California because of wildfires and other issues of the last few years. I'm sure that'll come to Florida very soon. That might come to Texas if it's going to be 120 degrees a day all the time, or worse at night. Yeah. So I feel like, the dots are there to be connected, and that we all need to be doing at least a little bit of that connecting.
So that is me to my last question, which is basically based on what you just mentioned. What brands do you admire most, assuming those brands we probably like linked to what we just discussed here? You don't have to name names, it's not the point here, but what do you admire the most about? You mentioned to me like longevity, persistence, stability, long-termism. Tell us more about the kind of brands that actually are using design as a tool for the greater good.
I struggle with this. I'm a strong believer in the value of persistence. I appreciate both organizations and people that stick at something for a long time because the experience tends to be undervalued, but it's so important. And I tried to answer that question about brands that like specifically have used design. There's the obvious ones like Apple. I hate to admit it, but to some degree, Tesla. but I can't really think of like maybe Patagonia. But I honestly, it didn't seem like there were any particular brands that I could think of that checked all the right boxes. So it might be a fun thing to turn that back to the people on this call and see what brands they appreciate and why those brands, or what the characteristics are, the attributes of those brands are.
So maybe before we turn to the question, which is fine, let's talk about the brands you don't admire, the brands that you see. You don't have to name names, but like the brands that are just not really helping climate crisis or other social dilemmas we're facing.
I think, the healthcare industry, and certainly the for-profit educational industry and the defense industry, let's not forget them, are really concerning in terms of just how many resources they're sucking up and how unstoppable they feel at times. As far as like specific kinds of companies, I think I'm really, I just think there's a lot of get-rich-quick organizations and churches of prosperity and every kind of opportunity to make a quick buck that clearly have no one's interest at stake. I mean, it's just too many to name, frankly. So again, I'd probably love to turn it back to the people on the call and see.
And so we have about 50 minutes left, and I think we'll both have a hard stop. So Robin or Brendan, do you have any question you've been able to gather from the attendees that we can ask Lou about?
Not quite yet. There's some good conversation happening, but I have a personal one I'd like to throw out there. And if anybody in chat, please drop your questions in. Now's the time we want to have discussion. But this is something that I've struggled with for years, ever since meeting Steven Anderson and moving to Dallas and all these amazing authors I'm surrounded by, and they're putting out these great books. And I'm like, I love giving talks. I love speaking. I love participating and I love writing. Hey, all these great tastes, it tastes great together, right? So then my problem is, what do I put out there? What is the topic that I need to address that maybe is underserved in the space right now? And I look at the universe of design libraries, and it feels like everything's been said. It feels like there's a bunch of intro stuff for how to break into the industry. It feels like a bunch of mature stuff. And then it feels like there's a bunch of really high-end leadership stuff. And then like everything in between. And I go, I don't know what I have left to contribute to this space. That is my biggest problem, is finding a topic. And then a year later, 5 new books come out. And I'm like, oh yeah, those are great. Love them. Right. And so every time I look at the space, it feels like it's full. And then 100 books come out and they don't feel like noise. They feel like unique snippets that are just as valid as everything around them. So how do you recommend aspiring authors and whatnot to kind of find that niche, find that topic or topics, those things that maybe should be said or maybe be readdressed? Are there old topics that resurrected? How do we go about finding those things that you want to publish, that people?
I'm gonna push back a little bit, Brandon, because I think that making a contribution to the field does not need to correlate directly with writing a book. There's many ways to contribute to the field, and in fact, my feeling is if you find yourself having a conversation again and again about something that really drives you, that's contributing. Now, do you want to take that conversation and scale it up and then polish it off into something like a book down the road? Quite possibly. And the topics that come to us over the transom and the people behind them, I don't really have unfortunately need to, but crystal clear editorial agenda. There's some books we want to publish, but there's a lot of the books that come to, we just can't know everything that we want to do as a publishing house. And so we do look to people to come to us. And part of it is, can they communicate? Is the topic something that yes, if it's been addressed before and not by us, because we never set up authors' titles to compete with each other, unlike a lot of publishers. Is it something that is like a unique take? So one thing that, some publishers like us do is we try to not just publish the celebrities who have already been published, but we try to surface voices that don't often get heard from for whatever reason. And so we're often looking to hear perspectives that come from different places. And so it might be a topic that's been looked at again and again, but not from this fresh perspective. But ultimately, you got to have the passion for it. You got to really find yourself already absorbed by it and talking about it and having conversations about it, because otherwise you're going to have a really tough year or two writing. You're going to get really sick of that topic pretty quickly once you find that, it's the weekend and what are you going to do Saturday? You can sit at your computer all day while everyone else is having fun.
I've heard one time, a long time ago, like you're supposed to, you write the book that you want to read, right? If you go to the bookstore and you're looking for a specific topic, you can't find it. Well, guess what? Write the book you want to read, right? Because obviously there's a gap here. Let me ask you, what books do you personally recommend this summer for us to read that may or may not be of your company? What are some good design books that you would recommend?
Good design books in general. I mean, a lot of the great books are books that I'm sure people know about. Let me talk about the books I wish someone would write. Would that be okay? All right. I mentioned The Blind Man and the Elephant Fable before, and I think that's a really big issue in the research field, where you have different perspectives that represent different academic communities. In other words, like you've got research that's being done by business analysts and research that's being done by anthropologists and research that's being done by cognitive psychologists and on and on and on, marketers. These are all research. They're all valid, and they use different tools, and it comes in different formats, and they're all very limited lenses on reality. And I really feel like there's a place, and have for a while, for a book that really puts that all together, whether you look at it as mixed methods or qual and quant research or some other combination, but that takes the realm of research and creates a framework where those blind men, those different research tools can actually have that conversation. That's the synthesis that leads to insight, to a greater picture of reality. So that's a really tough book, whoever's going to write that, but I really feel like we need more in that space. Another area that I think someone should take a crack at is, you may be familiar with the book, The First 90 Days. And that book has been around for 10 years. It's not a design book. It's a book that a consultant wrote to help people understand how to be more successful in their jobs in the first 90 days. I feel like that's an interesting use case, and that there's room for someone with maybe an ethnographic toolkit to help people not only understand their job and the company behind their job. What is that organization? How does it work? And let's map it out. Who's doing what in theory versus reality? What are the motivations? What are the goals? How do things get done? And that would be really useful not only for new employees in the first 90 days, but it might be useful for when you get promoted or move to another division, or you're made a manager, or any other sort of point at which you need to do sense making at an organizational level. I think that would be a really important book. As one of you pointed out, I think there's all these people skills that need to be framed up in some way that makes them more accessible, that distills them down. We probably need more service design books on an industry or vertical basis. We did Peter Jones' service design book about healthcare a million years ago, and it's a tough read, and it was a bit early. But I'm wondering if We need more examples from specific industries today. So that's just a few ideas.
Okay. You are mostly working in the US, right? North America.
UX in what?
US and North America, like Canada, Mexico.
Well, we have authors from outside North America.
Do you see different kind of trends in terms of like design books in other parts of the world? They actually have different focus on different aspects of service design, or healthcare might not be a big of a deal in Europe as in the US, and so on and so forth.
Well, I mean, like there's certain trends that everyone on this call is, I'm sure, very familiar with, like service design having originated in Europe, and so it's got more traction there, and there are areas like customer experience that seem to have gotten a foothold here, but like very much in the public sector. But I don't see any trends at a geographical level that I find are really that interesting personally. Nothing really stands out for me, but again, it'd be interesting to hear about what other people on the call might have seen there.
Let's open. We have a few more minutes. Are there any questions from anyone for Lou? Brendan, Robin, did you get questions?
No, I think we've got a lot of listeners, and there's some good conversation going on. I love some of the things people have brought up. There's a lot of agreement with you, Lou, about knowledge about service design, and I like what Giovanna said. She said, "I believe not every topic is addressed to every persona who needs it." And that alone opens up a lot of possibilities. So I not a lot of questions today, but some really great feedback and commentary on the things you've been sharing, that just because a book was written for Group A doesn't mean that same book, there's a different book for Group B and C. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I did have a question for you. When recently an opportunity came my way that I needed to pass on, but there are groups out there creating not-for-profits and organizations trying to expand design leadership and expertise in government and education. There's a real dearth of technical knowledge from the private sector making its way into government and education, generally due to income reasons. And it's why I had to pass. I've got kids I'm trying to raise, and they've got to go to college, and ironically, education is too expensive for me to work in education, right? So do you see a space in the literature, in the books, either in textbooks or in other kinds of publishing, whatever it may be, to begin taking private sector knowledge and expertise and kind of moving that into government and education sector? How do we get better at that?
That's a really good question. And, we tried actually in the last couple of years to be part of that. We had created the Civic Design Conference that ran in 2021 and 2022, along with a community that we hosted over those 2 years, and tried to be part of that and found it very difficult. And to the point where, at least in terms of our economic model of offering conferences and so forth, we had to pull out of that. And we stopped doing that conference last year. Just weren't getting enough people interested to make it worthwhile from a business perspective. That said, I think there's been pretty decent organic evolution of the public sector taking on or incorporating better design slowly but surely. And the IRA here in the US certainly moved that a bit more quickly when that law passed a couple of years ago. So I don't know. I have a limited perspective on that, brand, but I guess what I'm saying is it's economics. The IRA pushing spending in the public sector ahead, and maybe just sort of the normal generational cycling where you get more digital natives using government services and being part of on government payrolls it's just changing. But I don't know. Maybe this is a question for all of you as service designers. Service design comes from Europe for the most part. Service design has grown up to a large degree, if I understand it, in the public sector in Europe. And we look to places like Denmark and Estonia and the UK as having done really good service design work at a governmental level. And we wonder why we can't do things like that in the US. Does it occur to us that if you compare the US and Denmark or Estonia, we've got 30 times the population with far more heterogeneity, ethnically, religiously, politically, every way you can cut it. And is that a problem for service design? Does service design work at, let's say, the level of the federal government of 330 million Americans? I don't know.
Well, we know there are branches of government that are being service designed. We talk about the British government, compatibility with citizenship experience. We know about the Dubai citizenship experience that's really amazing, right? You can do everything on the Dubai website. So there are definitely ways service designer can actually help make processes better and reinvent the way things are, even very large scale, at countryside, kind of stuff. I know you have a hard stop, Lou. I have one last question from David, if it's okay with you. David is asking, are there a couple of books that you've published that surprised you, more interesting than you thought it would be, more insightful than expected, in an area that you hadn't thought about?
Orchestrating experiences comes to mind. And I really give Chris and Patrick a lot of credit. Chris, who's actually in Austin, for managing to do a really great job of integrating service design, user experience design, and customer experience design in one package, and to do so in a way that really, every chapter comes with a workshop exercise that you can do. And I just think I did not expect that practicality, that applicability to come out of that book. Thank you for holding it up. Isn't that pretty? Greg, it's going in and out because you blur on, but I caught a quick view. But that's one that comes to mind right away.
Okay. Another one before you go? And you looked at...
Jobs to Be Done playbook by Jim Callback, who I know you either had on this series or going to, is probably our best-selling book of the last few years.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and it's partly because it's a design book written by a designer, but he took a topic that wasn't necessarily native to the design world, Jobs to Be Done, which came out of consulting world, the business consulting world, and he leaned heavily into that language and that framing, but I think did a really fantastic job of not only resolving differences between the two main schools of thought in Jobs to Be Done, but in making it practical and accessible in a way that designers are really good at doing, maybe compared to business consultants.
Yeah, we had the joy to have in, I think it was last year, doing like a mini workshop on Jobs to Be Done, and it was great. Jamie is fantastic, of course.
Yeah.
Lou, I know you have got to go, so I really appreciate you visiting us today and sharing your knowledge and experience on the design book publishing. It was great to finally talk to you after reading so many of your books. So you actually exist. You're a real person. It was nice of you to share your knowledge with us today. I really appreciate it.
Greg, thank you so much. And thank you for the wonderful questions. And Robin and Brandon and you for organizing. And thank you everyone for joining today. Hope to hear from you again.
Sure will. Thank you, Lou. Have a good day.
Thanks all.
Cheers.